Honourable members, please be seated. Honourable members, we shall continue. And I now offer the floor to the Deputy Prime Minister, Honourable Professor Prasad, to make his contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I rise to fully endorse the motion tabled by the Honourable Prime Minister and the head of our coalition government. And let me also confirm, Mr. Speaker, say that this motion is not only a knee-jerk reaction to public concerns about travel expenditure, as valid as the concerns have been for almost 11 months, and were indeed so for more than 6 years, since 29 September 2016 up to 14 December 2022, when the Fiji First government was in power. Mr. Speaker, I can understand why the Honourable Leader of the Opposition and the Honourable John Eusemate would oppose this motion, and they camouflage their opposition to some kind of dubious argument about process. Very dubious argument about process. And let me remind them, because some of them were part of that. When the Public Accounts Committee, Honourable Speaker, under my chairmanship, at that time the opposition was chairing the Public Accounts Committee, came to a point where we demanded the secret salaries payment and the terms and conditions on which it was determined to be brought before the Public Accounts Committee. Thereafter, I was sacked through an amendment to the standing order in this parliament. And all of them were sitting there supporting it. Then Mr. Speaker, sir, they talk about process. On 3rd October 2014, 3 days before the new parliament is supposed to sit, the interim government, in which their leaders were part of, brought a decree and determined for themselves, for the opposition, the salaries and packs that they were getting, after knowing that they had won the election and they were going to sit on government. What process they're talking about? Then, Mr. Speaker, sir, that is the hypocrisy, that is coming from them. We know, Mr. Speaker, that it has taken the People's Coalition government 9 months to bring this motion to the floor of this parliament. And the Honourable Prime Minister quite clearly explained why. And despite the fact that all members of parliament, Mr. Speaker, continued to endure a 20% salary cut, first imposed as an austerity measure from April 2020 by the former government. And we know that our critics have generally demanded for a reduction in the overseas travel allowances. We do not blame them, Mr. Speaker. They are speaking out because we have given them the full freedom to do so. We also do not blame them, Mr. Speaker, for not talking about these things before, because they were afraid. There was a fear of being victimized, harassed, intimidated by the former government. And we have abundance of examples of that kind of victimization, harassment and intimidation from 2014 to 2022. Mr. Speaker, let me just, because this is important, because they are confused. They do not support the reduction because they were part of the loot of the increase in allowances for that many years. And they're actually confused. So they are camouflaging and say, oh, this is a political thing. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, you were not in Parliament, and due to this two years of unfair suspension from May 2015, when the overseas travel allowances skyrocketed because at that time, an overwhelming majority of 50 MPs who occupied this august chamber decided to vote for ridiculously high allowances on 29 September 2016. Neither was the Honourable Prime Minister, and indeed many other honourable members on both sides of these chambers. As part of our coalition government, only Honourable DPM Gavoka, Honourable Randronro, and I were back then sitting in the opposition. The current opposition, which was back then the government, and in fact, Mr. Speaker, Honourable Leader of the Opposition, when he was speaking, he actually...
Let me correct you, Honourable DPM. Honourable Randronro never agreed.
No, I'm saying he was with us in the opposition.
Yes.
That's what I said.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is at that time, there are only three of us sitting on the opposition who are in government at the moment. That's what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker. Myself, Honourable Randronro, and Honourable DPM Gavoka. The current opposition, I'm talking about 16. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, I've never seen the opposition so confused. The current opposition, which was back then the government, and Mr. Speaker, they cannot even up to this point fathom the fact that they are sitting in the opposition. I think it will take them 4 years to learn the opposition ropes. Honourable Koya, Honourable Bala, Honourable Pille, Honourable Bulitabu, Honourable Korey Lavisau, Honourable Maharaj, and of course Honourable Usumate. Mr. Speaker, it is worth recalling what Honourable Usumate said the day in support of the recommendations of the Emoluments Committee, and I quote, "Ideally, in an ideal world, we would get an independent party to come, but in this particular instance, the Emoluments Committee has decided that it will not look at the remuneration, but it must take into consideration those aspects of allowances that have an impact on the livelihood of how well the parliamentarians themselves can carry out the roles." That is what we are looking at today. This is what he said. The Emoluments Committee and his suggestions is probably something people will not like it politically because it has an impact on how people reflect on members of the House. But it is something that needs to be done because it has an impact on the ability of parliamentarians to fully engage themselves in the process to which they are called in this House. Mr. Speaker, the voting record of the day for the motion on a so-called shoddy emoluments report of 4 MPs will prove that there were 2 votes against the increase. And I can say very proudly, Honourable Prem Singh and I actually voted against the increases. Our position back then now, and now that we are in government, Mr. Speaker, remains the same. It is unethical and worst of all members of Parliament to determine our own salaries. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, this Emoluments Committee that this Parliament has appointed is engaging independent experts to do that. And you rightly, Mr. Speaker, have allowed the committee more time to come with a report done fairly, transparently, and in an accountable manner. I'm sure we all agree that the means to achieving the end is also important. Mr. Speaker, allow me to compare the new proposed rate of overseas travel allowances, and the Honourable Prime Minister has done that. But let me just repeat some of those. This is in respect of the Honourable Prime Minister, Cabinet Ministers, Assistant Ministers, Leader of the Opposition and Members of Parliament. Let us use the amount of USD $300 per day and a conversion rate of $2.20 from US to Fiji dollar. Purely as an example of a UNDP rate, which is the accepted standard for allowances. This, Mr. Speaker, sir, will demonstrate that the reduction is not a cosmetic exercise, but that the People's Coalition government is more than walking its talk of reducing salaries and allowances by 25%. It is actually much more than this. Under the current provisions of the Enumerations Act, the PM will receive a daily overseas travel allowance of $2,910. Under the new reduced rate, the allowance will be $1,320 per day. And this is a big reduction, Mr. Speaker, of $1,590. Even if you double the reduced allowance of $1,320, it doesn't reach what would be paid under the current provision, which is $2,910 per day. Therefore, it is a reduction of not 25%, but well over 100%. And this is substantial, Mr. Speaker. And this is why the 250% loading on US dollars is being removed and replaced with 100%. The $600 a day as incidental allowance is being removed altogether. In the case of cabinet ministers, Mr. Speaker, there is a similar scenario. And again, the reduction is more than 100%. The leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, will get the same allowance as that of ministers under the current provisions. And as I said, it's the same as the ministers. The assistant ministers will receive the same allowance under the new provisions from 1st December. So, Mr. Speaker, it is very important for us to understand that this process that we have adopted, and the Honorable Prime Minister explained why this has taken this much time. Mr. Speaker said the Honorable Prime Minister has been blamed for benefiting from exorbitant travel allowances. But it is only justified. You know, if you look at the previous government's travel budget for the Prime Minister. And so the critics will have to understand. Let me just give you some statistics, Mr. Speaker. In the last 8 years, they spent a total of $74 million in domestic and overseas travel. This is the travel cost of the previous government. The Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, I'm just talking about the extent of expenditure, Mr. Speaker. Let me give them some. From 2014 to 2022, total domestic travel of $50.4 million. For overseas travel from 2014 to 2022, $24 million. This is the figures from the Ministry of Finance. So, Mr. Speaker, it is quite interesting that the honorable leader of the opposition, becomes so confused because he was part of the decision in 2016 to increase the allowance, in a way that became so exorbitant, Mr. Speaker.
We are doing good. That's the point.
And it is again, Mr. Speaker, absolutely important for us to remind those people on the other side that these are the very people who did not follow the process, who hid the information from the public. And here is a government, here is a Prime Minister who, at the beginning of the term of the government, Mr. Speaker, announced announced that we will be reducing the allowances and the salaries. We have kept the 20% reduction on the salaries as well, Mr. Speaker said. I'm raising this, Mr. Speaker, because it is important for the people of this country to know, and the confusion that is coming from the opposition. But tomorrow what they will do, Mr. Speaker said, when they go out, they will still go and talk about overseas trips. Honorable Ketan Lal, posted it in Facebook. He talks about the Prime Minister's travel allowances. He talks about the 10,000 allowances. This is what they do. But when they come here in the Parliament, they talk about the processes. Yes. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition should actually look at what some of his MPs are writing and saying before he comes here in this Parliament and says, This is the hypocrisy that I'm talking about from the opposition, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a very timely motion by the Honorable Prime Minister, and I hope the opposition, Mr. Speaker, will change their mind. They'll change their mind, and they will support this motion. Yes. They will support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes. Honorable Ketan Lal, I heard you very clearly when you uttered the word hopeless government. I want to caution you again. Please, those who are sitting on this side, they've received the mandate from the people to be on this side, and as well as on this side, your side. So let's respect it. There's no such thing as a hopeless government. I hope you'll be mindful of that, Honorable Ketan. Thank you. I now call on the Honorable Prime Minister to speak in reply.